Hi everyone, great to have you back. All right, in this video, we'll be looking at how to run logics on startup in Spring Boot. Okay, before now, the previous video, I spent about two videos explaining how to all the events that are published during the startup of an application, right, of a Spring Boot application, and we're able to look at it critically. All right, and we touched on every single thing. All right, that's very important because we'll be making use of, I think, about one. We'll be making use of one of them in this same scenario, because one of those published events we can actually add the listen, and it's a good place for us to have those, or to have data to actually publish, or to start up, to write a some sort of logic when we are starting up. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. All right. Okay, so coming back to our project, right? The same project. I've already committed this the last bit, right? You could just check the GitHub. Go just check the GitHub link. I'll do my best. I'm not entirely sure, but I'll do my best to update all the descriptions to contain the GitHub link. I think I only pasted it on one so that we can follow depending on which video we are working, and we can basically just click the link. I'll ensure I actually do that. All right. So what we are going to be doing in this video, like I mentioned, is to actually run startup events, right? To run startup events, some logic we want to run when starting up an application. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a package. I'm going to call it startup logic. Startup logic. All right. Yeah. Packages should have lowercase. So let me name this. Packages should not have camel case. It's just a convention in Spring, basically, right? Or in Java, so to say. All right, so startup logic. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the context refresh events we looked at earlier. This is a very good place to start, right? This part is a very good place to start, because at this point the final bin has already been loaded up, so we could basically place our logic in here to get things started, right? Like I mentioned, the moment you are able to use an event listener, right, we could also make it work the same way if we actually had something like this. If we're actually using the implement application listener. So let's go the other route and use a context refresh event listener, but using this method, because we want to use it to enable some startup logic. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm gonna do, we already have that, so let's just call it I'll call it context startup logic, so that way we know that we're referring to the context refresh. Context refreshed startup logic. Startup, I think startup is fine. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to implement application listener, but this time around we'll be putting in context refresh event, right? Then we basically just implement that, right? So we have this. So I'm just going to rename this, instead of on application events, I'm basically just naming on startup. Okay, it violates the contracts, basically. Okay, so we have this. And remember, if you're going this way, I'm deliberately going this way for you to see if you go this way or just place an event listener, it works. So you can go this route or go this other route. Since we've already used this format to get things done, let's try the other bit also. So we're gonna have this. Then I want to run some startup logic, right? So let's place in. So I'm gonna do. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna inject. Because the beans are already available at this point, so I can basically, let's do an SLF for J, right? So we're just going to bring something in, then I'm going to inject I'm basically going to inject the final private, then application. Let's inject the environment. Yeah, we can inject the environment at this point. It should be available since we already have it stationed, right? All the beans should have been loaded. So I'll make this as required axe constructor. So we have this, but I'm not going to make this a bean, right? I won't make this a bean. What I'm going to do is I'm going to inject it when we're actually doing this, when we actually are doing this part. Remember, if we're just using these parts, I could just inject everything directly. It's simpler, it's easier. But I wanted to show you this method if you're actually going through this method also. So what can we extract from this environment? I can extract some properties, right? So it's same thing as saying you've done some business logic. You can just inject those your services in here, and things are supposed to work automatically. So think about it from that perspective. And we can also go ahead and bring in one of the services. It should also work per se, because everything should be available. And let's go ahead. Let me pick one service. Okay, this is a service, and the service is printing. Okay, let's just create another service. Just say startup context event. Startup context event. Context refreshed. Just to distinguish things, right? Refreshed events. That's the whole essence. Service. So let's make it a service. Then I'm gonna use at Z service, as Z component, just to let you guys know it's still what we can use. This thing is still available. Then I'm just gonna create a single method, right? So a public, I'll just return a string, and I'll say doing real work. All right, so I'm just gonna print that. Really, I'm just gonna return doing real work. So that's it, nothing more really. So I can basically have this. So if I bring this guy, inject it in here. So apparently with private final, then I have this guy service. Please note there are two issues in this part. Also, there are two ways in this part. The problem is, if you're going to be using this, it means wherever we are initializing it, we would be doing something. We have to inject this in the constructor, because we don't have any bin here, so we have to inject in the constructor. So there is also another way. If you don't want to do this, I'm sure you guys are already familiar, which is using the application context. So why don't you just use that, so that we don't have to inject all this in, right? Because you already know what they are. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to bring in my application context. So we have the EBS application.get context. This gives me the context, right? Then I can do the context.get get bean. Now I can get a bean class here. So bean. So I can get a bean class here. So getting a bean class, and I can put this in, because apparently this is available, right? And that should work per se. Now I have this refreshed bean, refreshed event service bean, refreshed event service. Then I have this already, so this works. At the same time too, let's bring in this guy. So I could say the context.get bean, then I can bring in the environment, right? Environment or class. This should basically be available too. So I'll call this env. All right, so let's explore our application properties, things we can bring in, right? I'll just go in and just create a context test, and I'll make it I'll give it Z something Z EBS, Z underscore EBS. So this is available as a property, so I can then extract this within a property, with that property coming in here. I could say from this part, I could say env.get property, and I pass in this property, right? And this basically comes in, and I can just do a log.info. Then I could say is context test. Basically, I'm just validating, right? I'm just validating. And in this part, I'll just say property dot equals, which is exactly what I placed in there. So I'll just copy it, this part here. So I'm not doing anything fancy here, right? So the whole idea is just to test that I'm able to access the environment, because this has already loaded up. I'm using the application listener, the context refresh event, and I can also access this here. I'm just going to just log. So let me give it a prefix so that it's easier to follow. And I'll also do log. I'll do the same thing here so that we can just follow the log. Can follow the log, and I'll say refresh event, then dot doing some work. So I expect to basically see this, right? All right. So that's about it. So with this done, I don't need to inject this anymore because I'm getting everything from the application context. So what can then happen if I bring this up and come to this part? So I should be able to add this in here. So I can say new and have this in here. So that should be able to bring this in. So there are two ways. So let's see this guy. Okay, so yeah, so remember this is exactly what I was saying. It's expecting the environment and this. So I could have gone this route, then I will inject things in. It should work. There should be no issue. Just pass it as just create a constructor in here, use the required as constructor and inject it in. But in this case, I don't want to inject, so I'm going to remove this. That was why I went the route of application context. Spring is quite dynamic, so you could actually use both ways and things works accurately. All right, so with that being said, you see this is no longer complaining. So let's go ahead and run it and see what we have. Okay, so we've actually done that. So what we're going to do is let's search for what we've done. So I'm going to bring this in this context. I'm going to say, as you can see, you see this is fine. I have the doing real work and I have the is context true. And you can see this work. So this is a very good place to do your startup. All right, this is a very good place to do your startup. Another one you've seen already, which we've already used in the monitor, which is the post construct. Post construct guarantees that after being initialization, it will be called once. Right, it will be called once. So this is also another way to actually do the same thing, to actually start up some work. So I'm just going to go ahead and just create a quick class and just call it post construct startup. So the whole idea I'm going to make is Z component. It's a component, so the component is already available. Why is this arranged like this? I prefer it here. All right, so I'll have, okay, I see why. So I'm gonna have a Z component, yeah. So that works. So I want my part here, yeah. I like my import at the top. Then I bring this here. All right. So this just guarantees that these always are. So I'm gonna bring in a post construct, and I'm gonna say, yeah, just do something for me. All right. So this part I'm gonna do. Let's do SLF4J for login, F4J. Then I'll do a log. .info. Okay, post construct startup is post construct. Yeah, I think this is fine in itself. So this basically runs one time, right? Also, to test it out, I could also place in at required as constructor in here. Let's bring in the environment, right? You can bring in the environment to be able to see that we can basically bring this guy in. We can bring in the context because the properties are loaded at this point. So I'm just going to just bring in the ports. So let's just log the ports. I'll say log post construct. Then I'll just give it some definition by externalizing, and I have env environment. I have the environment, then a get property. No, I don't want this. I want the server dot ports. I want the server dot ports, right? And if it's not available, it's good practice. You just give it something. I'll give it something arbitrary, 6550. All right, so we know it's available. I've not set the port, so it should be 8080. All right, so this is also another way to do that. So if we run this and see what happens. So if I were to search, as you can see, so we have the ports, which is get property server.ports. It's printing the default. I don't expect it to print the default. So let's see what we have in here. So required as constructor, final environment. Is it from core? Yeah, core env. All right. So I expect it to basically print this. Let me see. This part server.ports. So let's go. This part, so that should be. We bring this to server.port. So I expect it to bring the server.port, which is default. Okay, let's just go ahead and initialize it to 8080, which is what is already is. And let's run this again and see if it brings in the accurate bits. All right. Oh, great. So you can see 8080. So it was looking for this property, but it was initialized internally, so it was not finding it. But the moment you added this, you see it was able to find it. So this also shows that we can do the startup work in here. So when we run any startup logic, this is also a good place to get things done, right? Another part we can use another one called initializing bean, right, to do startup. So I'm just showing you several ways to do the same thing. You can use any one that fits your scenario, but I always advise when you're writing a project, don't use everything, right? Keep the standard. That is why a project always have a standard. Companies have standard. stick to a standard and pick one and use it across, so everybody who sees that immediately, oh, you're initializing here, right? For junior developers or for young developers coming in, they can immediately see that, okay, oh, I start up here. So when you explain it somewhere, this is for starting up, they know, oh, this is also for starting up here. Not that they see post construct somewhere, they see context refresh somewhere, they see command line run and say, what's all this? And you're saying, it's for starting up, and they're confused. Okay, which one should I learn? All right, so it's always good to have a standard to help things or help people easing into the code you've basically written. All right, so in this part we'll have initializing bean. So we have one initializing bean startup. So we're going to have this apparently. So this basically also works. So I'm going to label it a component. So it's a component. I'm going to give it SLF for J. Then we are going to basically implement what is called, we're going to implement initializing bean. And the initializing bean, once you actually take in this, it has a concept of after property set. So after property set, this is where we want to log everything we are doing. So I'm just going to do the same thing, bring in the property environment I meant to say. Then I basically need to give this at acquired as constructor. Then from this environment, I can basically log this also. So I can say get property, have my server ports, and this should basically work. And remember, since this is coming in, let's log it. Yeah. So in this part, we're going to have this. All right. So this is basically set. This is done now. Okay, we need one more here. So when I refresh this and I search for this, if you search for this, you can see this is also a great place to do some startup work. All right, so we've touched on 3 now, touched on context refresh startup. This is a different method, a different way of doing it. I've shown you can use the application listener. You can find the same way in, you can find it here, right? I just decided to go a different route in here so that we can get things, you can actually see different variants. The same way we have post construct also works. You can do this. It guarantees it will run once after bean have been set up, after bean have been initialized. Then we also have the initializing bean, right? This way also, this basically also works. You can do the same thing. Then the next thing we're going to be looking at is there is also another bit, which is we've already looked at the context refresh. So let's basically also look at, there is a part called the init bean, right? Init bean does not really mean it's not as if it's an annotation. It's just like we'll be creating a bean of that method, right, or of that class. So let me show you how it works. So let's just call it init bean startup, right? Init bean startup. All right, I think this is fine. Init bean startup. So apparently it's just a bean. I'm not going to do anything extra. All I just need to do, apparently in this part, let's go to, let me get public, let's see. Okay, do some work. Public string init bean. Let me just call it init bean startup method. Okay, then I'm going to bring in, remember you have 2 options, right? You have 2 options. You can basically bring in the constructors here, or should I say the properties you want to inject. But it means whenever you are actually initializing it, you need to actually inject those inside. Somebody might say, okay, let's just sit in effect. Okay, all right, so let's get it done. So I'll do a private, not you, do a private final environment. Then I'm going to make it as a acquired as constructor, so it is demanded when we are initializing it, right? And in this part, let's bring in at SLF for J also, at SLF for J, then this dot get property. All right, so let's just do server ports also. Let's log the server ports. I'm going to do log, yeah, then I have this. All right, so I can remove this for now. All right, so we have this basically done. So we have the bean startup. We have this. Why is this complaining? Okay, yes, I'm not returning anything. Okay, so let's just go ahead and return. Let me return a server port. Okay, so this basically works. We return the server port as a string. All right, so this works. Now to get this to work, all we just need to do is to create a bean, right? Is to create a bean. So in this case, we need some configuration. We can do it directly in here, but it's gonna get a bit. I want to do separate. I want to basically do it separately. That way we have good separation of concern. So that will do, because it's needed in here. So let's just create a package and call it config. Config, I call it startup configuration, right? Startup configuration. I'm not going to do anything fancy. I'm not doing anything fancy in here. Startup config. Now, so this startup config, I'll just give it that configuration. I already showed you that this is also a component. Then I'll just create a bean, right? There's nothing more. Just create a bean, and the bean will be of type, I'm sure you guess, init bean startup. So this is just basically, so I'm referencing this guy. That's all I am doing. I'm referencing this guy. So this basically is available to me, right? I have this bean available. So when this bean is then used somewhere else, once it's initialized, it can be used, the method can be used appropriately. All right, so let's basically get this going. So I have this already done. I have the startup config. So in my startup config, basically I'm now going to label this as init method. I'm going to label this as init method, and just giving me the word init. All right, now we'll see something very peculiar here. 1 minute. So let's get this done. If we check this init method, look at what it says. It said this is the optional name of a method to call the bean inside during initialization, not commonly used, given that the method may be called programmatically directly within the body of a bean annotated method. All right, so it's optional, right? But we're just basically placing it in here. All right, so we have the bean. So I can then go ahead and say return new bean. But remember, because I've all right, I don't know where you guys stopped. I think I mistakenly hit pause by default, and as a result, this was not actually coming up. So okay, all right, so I'll just quickly explain what I mentioned. So in this part, we actually started up, we looked at the init startup bean. The init startup bean, basically, you just need to create a method. You just need to create a class, create a method, any method, give it any name, list out the things you want to do, more like any work you want to do in it. Then go to a configuration class, right? Go to a configuration class, then make it a bean, then create a bean of that class. However, ensure that the name you give to your init method is the same as the name of your method. If you don't do that, it will not work, because if I do this, you see it's able to reference it. So when you start this up, like I did earlier, I think I mistakenly paused my recording, so I don't know if you guys were able to see this. So if you go this route and I check this part and I do a Ctrl+C and I find it in here, this part here, sorry. So it needs bean startup. As you can see, it's also here. All right, so this video is actually getting very long, right? It's already 23 minutes. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pause the video, quickly go ahead and just implement the remaining ones. I'll come in and less than a minute or two will explain everything. I don't want to, I'm always very peculiar or particular about the video getting longer than 20 minutes, but you have to forgive me. Let's allow it to get to about 25 minutes. So let me go ahead and do that, and I'll be back with you shortly. All right, thank you very much for holding on. All right, so the last one we're talking about is the application runner, right? The application runner works very similarly to the command line runner. Now, command line runner is also another way. So for the application runner, this is how it works. You just need to implement application runner. Application runner is from the org, the Spring Boot, Spring Framework, Framework.boot, right? You have that. This basically works the same. So if I run this right now and I do a runner start, I search for this, I'm going to find that basically in there also. So if I do this, runner startup, okay, so let's see what is missing in here. All right, let me look at this properly. I expect this to also be found. Let's run it again. Okay, let's see this. Let me see what is happening in here. All right, so we can find it. All right, so I think it took a while, But we can find it right here. Okay, so that's the runner startup logic. So the runner startup logic is also available. All right, so everything works. I was almost saying, hey, where are you? I couldn't find you. All right, so this works as expected. The reason I'm not going to touch on command line runner very quickly is because we've already used it several times. We've used command line runner in several places. This is command line runner. It works the same way. Just need to implement command line runner, and it actually has this method. You have to implement this method, and you can then do your startup logic, right? And I also showed you guys very critically, right? You can use these things. You can use these things all together. But if you want one logic to run before another, please consider using at order, because if you don't use at order, Spring cannot guarantee which will run before the other one. So you can actually have several classes do initializing work. Just ensure that you use the order to specify. My recommendation: stick to one, command line runner, application runner, whichever you use. Then use the at order to section or to actually distinguish which one should run before the next, and that gets things basically running for you. There is one last one I don't want to touch about. I don't want to talk about. Well, I don't want to talk about, and I don't like speaking about, which is doing things within your constructor, right? Doing things within your constructor. So you could basically have this. A typical example could be you have something like this. Then create a constructor, right? Create a constructor. Then within your constructor, you do your logic. You actually call a logic, right? This is commonly done for some people, right? Most times I try to avoid it, but it is not bad in itself, right? It is not bad in itself, right? This video is already long, right? But the way it works basically is you just have constructor logic. You have constructor. You have the, let's say, constructor startup. Because the whole idea is your at component as Z component, this will always run. So if I do a private final environment, right? Environment. So this will always run, right? So I have my environment in here. It has already been initialized. So I could basically just do my startup work in here. So at SLF for J, and I have log.info.constructor startup. So if we actually have this, I can basically search for this. I can call a bin in here, and this basically works for me all the same. All right, so that's the whole idea. So I could do let's do this, do this, do this, then bring this in. So if we do this, so constructor startup, let's look for it. So you see constructor startup, and this also works. But I don't recommend this most times. It works, guys. It's just personal preference. But I just want to also show you this is available. This video is already 28 minutes long. Apologies for dragging it this far, but I need to show you everything that has to do with the logic in starting up, right? You can actually have this customized logic when starting up, and this is how to do it. All right, I'm going to check this in under another issue in GitHub, and I'm going to actually commit and actually push against it. With that being said, thank you for your time. I'll see you guys in the next video.